What's that? In the sky! It's a bird! It's a plane! No, it's actually a bird. A firebird? Not that kind of firebird. This one has real wings and flames and doesn't make Kesha want to sleep with you. I'm Kinaesthesia, and today I like Kesha. And today I'll be going over the strategy for Alysrazor on the normal 10-man difficulty. From phase 1 in the Flight of Fames to phase 3 in the Burnout, this is one fight where the puns could get old quick. I'll try not to make you cringe with too many of those, and instead we'll focus on the real task at hand: how to kill one bird with 10 stones. The bird may be flying high now, but stick with me in our official Learn-to-Raid strategy guide and we'll show you how to drop it like it's hot. Alysrazor is a 4-phase repeating fight. We'll be covering it as 2 because, really Blizz, segments of encounters that last 10 seconds don't need to be called phases in the dungeon journal. Alysrazor has around 50 million health and will spawn multiple adds throughout the fight. Voracious hatchlings have around 20 million health each, Blazing Talon initiates have around 650,000, Plumped lava worms cannot be attacked by players, and Blazing Talon claw shapers must be controlled. You'll want to bring 2 tanks, 2 to 3 healers, and may want to favor melee for the 10-man version. Let's look at the abilities in this fight. Alysrazor will start off the fight by knocking back all players with her Firestorm ability. This will also deal mild fire damage to all players and tick for additional fire damage each second for 10 seconds. The encounter area will also be blocked by walls of volcanic fire. Touching these will result in 3rd-degree burns and feeling stupid. Whenever Alysrazor flies over the center of the arena, she will repeatedly perform her Blazing Claw ability. This deals very high physical damage to all players in a wide cone in front of the boss. Each hit will also increase the player's fire and physical damage taken for a short while. While she cleaves above the raid, Alysrazor will begin molting, causing her to drop molten feathers across her path. Molten feathers can be picked up by players to a maximum of 3 feathers to gain buffs throughout the encounter. Movement speed is increased by 30% per feather. Holding just 1 allows players to cast spells while moving, while holding the maximum of 3 allows players to fly with the Wings of Flame buff. Flying players will need to contend with additional boss abilities in the air. Alysrazor will leave rings of fire in her wake as she flies. Passing through the rings will cause players to gain the stackable Blazing Power buff, increasing their haste by 4%. Passing through the rings will also replenish resources such as energy and mana and refresh Wings of Flame buff duration. Players skilled enough to gain 25 stacks of Blazing Power will gain the Alysrazor buff, increasing their crit chance by 50% for 30 seconds. Alysrazor will leave incendiary clouds in the air as she flies around. Touching these will cause moderate fire damage every 1.5 seconds. Players on the ground during this phase will need to deal with adds. Blazing Talon initiates have 2 abilities. Brush Fire creates a small ball of fire that travels along the ground in a straight line. It will deal mild fire damage every second to any players hit by it. They will also cast a very high damage Pyroblast on the closest player to them. During each phase 1, 2 voracious hatchlings will spawn. The moment they spawn, the closest player will gain the Imprinted debuff. The hatchling will only attack the player they've imprinted, but this player will cause 1000% damage on all attacks to the hatchling. Occasionally, the hatchling will debuff their target with a gushing wound. The target will bleed for mild physical damage 5 times a second until their health falls below 50%. Hatchlings will eventually become hungry, giving their melee attacks a 20% chance to throw them into a tantrum. While in a tantrum, the hatchling's damage and haste is increased by 50%. This debuff can only be removed by allowing the ad to consume a plump lava worm ad. Upon doing so, the hatchling becomes satiated for a short while and cannot throw a tantrum. Plump lava worms cannot be attacked by players and will only use the Lava Spew ability. This Frontal Cone Fire ability deals mild fire damage to all players in a short range. After being in this phase a while, Alysrazor will begin to fly quick circles around the arena. Players with the Wings of Flame buff will have it removed from them, and a fiery vortex will appear in the middle of the room. This, of course, deals very high fire damage to all players touching it. Shortly after, multiple fiery tornadoes will erupt from the vortex and begin racing around the arena. During this, more rings of fire will appear on the ground, giving players who pass through them the same blazing power buff from earlier. Soon, the boss will burn out and crash to the ground. While on the ground, Alysrazor will be unable to move and take 100% increased damage. Being hit by a spell also causes her to give off Essence of the Green, restoring 10% of the player's maximum mana per spell. Alysrazor will crash with 0 molten power, but her spark will cause her to gain 3 every 2 seconds. In addition to this, upon crashing, 2 Blazing Talon Claw Shapers will spawn. Each of these adds will attempt to channel molten power into the boss through their ignited ability. Once her molten power reaches 50%, the boss will reignite. Alysrazor will begin to gain 3 molten power every second since she is now ignited. This lasts until she reaches 100 molten power. Her blazing buffet will deal mild fire damage to all players every second. During this, she will constantly swipe at the raid once again with her blazing claw ability. Once Alysrazor has reached 100 molten power, she is at full power and will deal moderate fire damage to all players and knock them back. At this point, Phase 1 will begin again and the fight repeats. Most of Phase 1 is about properly allocating your DPS and handling adds. We'll start with Voracious Hatchlings. Shortly into the fight, via special airmail delivery, 2 Voracious Hatchlings will be dropped into the fight like care packages. One tank will pick up each hatchling simply by being the closest player to its spawn point. This will cause each tank to gain the imprinted debuff, allowing them to do 100% damage to their hatchling. They will need this buff to do the DPS required to kill their ad in time. While tanking the hatchlings, tanks will need to move them around to consume plumped lava worms in order to keep the hatchling from throwing tantrums. Be ready to use a tank or healer cooldown whenever hatchlings tantrum. 4 lava worms will spawn twice during each air phase. This means each tank can remove 4 tantrums. All other players should stay away from lava worms as to not be caught in their breath. Blazing Talon Initiates will spawn 2 at a time in 4 predetermined spots. Their spawns will alternate in a predictable pattern, so DPS can be ready for them each time. Split the ground DPS into 2 teams. Each team will be responsible for handling adds on their side. Make sure to use stuns and interrupts on the initiates to keep them from pyroblasting and sending out brush fires. It is unlikely that DPS will have much free time between initiates, but if there is any, use it to help kill the Voracious Hatchlings. It is very important that the hatchlings die before the next phase of the fight begins. Throughout the phase, Alysrazor will occasionally fly through the center of the arena, clawing at the air and cleaving any players in her path. Make sure not to be in the middle as this occurs. More importantly, once she is out of the way, more molten feathers will have been left behind. All players should attempt to get at least 1 feather before the next phase starts. Each feather increases movement speed, and having just 1 will allow spells to be cast while moving. Having 3 will allow players to fly, but this should be reserved only for the players assigned to DPS the boss during Phase 1. These players will begin the fight by immediately grabbing 3 feathers and pursuing Alysrazor into the air. They will demonstrate their Star Fox skills by doing barrel rolls through the fire rings she leaves behind. Each successive ring will buff the player as well as refresh the duration of their wings. There are fire clouds in the sky to avoid, but for the most part, these players must simply follow Alysrazor and fly through the rings. This will continue until the start of Phase 2. At the start of the next phase, Alysrazor will begin to fly quick, tight circles around the arena. As she does this, a fiery vortex forms in the center, and players will have their Wings of Flame buff snuffed out by the winds. After a short period, the vortex in the center will send out many more tornadoes, and players will need to hone their Alakir training to avoid being hit. Having the speed buff from Molten Feathers will make avoiding these much easier. This will persist for a very short time, and Alysrazor will eventually burn out. This is your Magmaw head down burn phase, hose phase. Alysrazor will crash with 0 molten power and will reignite and rise again when it reaches 50. The Blazing Talon Claw Shapers that spawn in this phase will attempt to channel more molten power into her. Have your tanks lock these mobs down to keep them from casting while the rest of your DPS pours all of their DPS into the boss. She will take extra damage during the burnout and restore mana each time she is hit by a spell. Eventually, when Alysrazor reaches 50 molten power, she will reignite and begin to hover over the raid as she thieves wildly. The tanks will need to pick her up and face her away from the raid. Raid damage will be very high, as fire damage will tick until she is back to her full molten power. The raid should rotate cooldowns such as Aura Mastery, Barrier, and Spirit Link Totem until she has returned to the sky. Once this phase ends, Phase 1 will begin again and the fight starts back at the top. Alysrazor is not a pushover, but it is a very execution-based encounter. Like any execution-based encounter, it is important to focus on exactly what you need to be doing and where you need to be standing. Don't be confused by the plethora of events occurring around you, or get caught worrying about how other players are performing. Make sure to do your job well and stay focused until the boss dies. For more tips, tricks, and jokes at Kesh's expense, bookmark us at LearntoRaid.com, subscribe to us on YouTube and Justin TV, and follow us on Twitter. Thanks for checking us out here at LearntoRaid.com. We hope this guide was helpful, and we'll see you at the next boss.
I wasn't feeling so good. I just didn't feel like playing anymore. So I went home, and I got all comfy and cozy and all scrunched up in front of my phonograph. And I sat there